I had a hobby too. Mine happened to be guns and ballistics, and I studied guns and ballistics as much as I could, and I wrote an article about high velocity.
So out of all my years working at Weatherby, the last 5 have been some of the most exciting. Working with Adam, with him running the company.
And to think that I get the opportunity of carrying on my grandfather's legacy 75 years later here in Sheridan, Wyoming, I mean, it really is a dream come true.
Oh, I'm home. Thank God I'm home.
On Our Mark, the Weatherby Podcast.
All right, welcome back to On Our Mark, the Weatherby Podcast. I'm Luke Torkeldsen, run sales, marketing, and product development here at Weatherby, and we have a special guest in the podcast room today. And
Very good to be here.
Baz. Baz, give us your full name.
Hey everybody, I'm Basil Staros. I'm a engineer here at Weatherby, and I've been working on some interesting testing on these new recoil pads.
Well, hold on. We don't want to let the whole cat
okay,
out of the bag
okay.
too fast here.
Okay.
So I know you're excited to get going.
Very cool stuff to share today, guys.
We do have some cool stuff to share. So I'm pretty sure if you're listening to this podcast, you already know that we recently released the new Backcountry 2.0. It uses a stock from Peak 44 and a 3D Hex Recoil Pad that Baz was doing a lot of testing on, and that's what we really want to talk about. So what is the advantage of that system, really, the Peak 44 stock, and furthermore, I guess it's the advantage of the recoil pad?
So with our backcountry lineup, of course, we want the lightest firearm on the market.
Right.
And one of the challenges of that is not only in the stock itself, but in the recoil pad. Typical recoil pads, say the Packmeyer, the Limb Saver, whatever they may be, is a molded rubber that's solid throughout. And that molded technology, although has worked for almost 100 years now, what we're seeing is they're just too heavy. They're about 4 to 6 ounces for a recoil pad. So we wanted a solution that would allow us to keep the lightweight side of the stock, but also mitigate recoil best we could.
So obviously we've got some really lightweight guns. Like the worst or best case scenario would probably be like our 6.5 RPM. It's shooting a 140 grain bullet, 3,100 feet per second roughly. And you're talking about a 4.9 pound gun.
That's right.
If you're judicious on which scope you choose, you can be scoped for well under 7 pounds.
Yeah.
That's a lot of energy coming out of the muzzle. And I think a lot of people think, well, yeah, sure, it's light, but it's going to knock my shoulder off.
So recoil in response to Magnum chambered rifles is something that we've been hearing at Weatherby ever since the very beginning. So how do we mitigate recoil that's coming out of the end of our rifle? And there's a couple of ways we can do this. One way we can do this is we can have a heavy gun. Well, cross that off the list because the
That's
backcountry
not what the
is not
backcountry
that.
is. Yeah.
Exactly. The other way we can do this is we can add a muzzle brake, which
We do
have.
And we recommend you use it. It helps a lot.
100%. We find 30% reduction in recoil just with the muzzle brake alone. Now, the other thing is a good recoil pad. And this was the biggest challenge that we had to overcome because we need a good recoil pad, but it can't be heavy like traditional recoil pads.
Right. It's an area that we can save a lot of weight. So I early on, when I first shot it, I could feel that there was a difference. Like, I didn't get this sharp, what I just put like air quotes around the word kick. The rifle kicks so hard. It felt different on this system, this setup. So you, through the testing that you've done, first of all, I want you to describe kind of the apparatus that you built to test recoil. And I don't know, I'm sure there's some other people doing it similarly, but go ahead and just describe what you did, because I think it's pretty clever.
So we have had a recoil system that we've been retrofitting for some time now. Something that we get as feedback from our customers a lot is the idea that, well, how much does my gun recoil? So we've been trying to collect data, trying to track data, and it turns out that this system is the perfect thing to test these recoil pads. What we can do is we can take rifles of similar builds, the same cartridge, same load, and we can put them into this basically it's a lead sled, a specialized made lead sled that has something called a strain gauge on the end of it.
Okay.
What that strain gauge is it's essentially collecting data of the force pushing against that flat surface of the gauge. So to explain it better, what we have is
You made a fake shoulder.
Yeah, exactly.
You made a fake shoulder with,
with
a sensor behind it.
We made an electronic shoulder that could track the recoil data in real time. And to give you a sense of what that means, I mean, we're tracking data points every.
Yeah, the impulse of a shot is very fast.
Yes, we were collecting about 90 data points in 1/80th of a second, 12.5 milliseconds.
Okay. So what did you learn? So I know I've seen it, so I'm trying to not cheat too much, but the graphs tell it all.
Mm-hmm.
So give us like a summary of what your findings were.
So we tested, of course, against the Peak 44 pad, and we tested against what our current pads are on some of our other lineups, the Packmeyer pads, and we found that the Peak 44 pad consistently had about half as much recoil as a Packmeyer, and that's
so it's still the same cartridge, like that energy
Yes.
is going somewhere.
So
it's not just the leading half of the
Right.
recoil, right? What's happening?
Right, so it's mitigating it, and to give everyone an idea, when we did this testing, we were testing with the 7mm Weatherby. It was during the ammo crisis. We felt
We're
it
still
too.
in the ammo crisis.
We are. We felt it too, and we decided to use a cartridge that wasn't under such demand like the 300. So we used the 7mm Weatherby,
Okay.
shooting a 140 grain interlock, and not entirely sure on the velocity. I think it's like 3,200.
I'm not sure on that one either.
I don't want to say, but anyways, what we see is the way that the recoil pad reacts in that short window of time compared to a Packmeyer is it's got a lot more room to kind of smush down.
Okay.
A better way to describe this really is there's a lot more going on in these pads than what we see on the outside.
Right.
So on the inside, something very interesting that Peak 44 has done is they've used something called lattice technology. So the way that these are 3D printed and the way that these are designed is it's actually designed to crush.
Okay.
Whereas a typical Packmeyer pad is just solid rubber. So it may feel soft on the outside, but if you try and take a Packmeyer pad and press it all the way
further
down,
you push, the harder it pushes against
exactly,
you, right?
Exactly, and has less room to push. It's a solid mass, whereas this has spaces on the inside that allow it to collapse and return. And that's not only in the design that's very unique, it's the material that they chose.
So it's not like it collapses inches. It's a nominal amount of space, but it's allowing it to collapse more, so you feel less recoil. Or
what it's doing
what's
is
the time element?
It's mitigating that recoil over time. So
Okay.
as it's crushing, and crushing's a bad word, as it's beginning to compress, what's happening is it'll compress one section of the pad and then begin to compress the next. And during that moment in time in which the pad is compressing, there's actually no additional force being added to the shooter's shoulder. So what we see with any recoil pad that we've tested during these, essentially there's an allowance that material can absorb, and then after that it's just like a solid rock.
Sure.
So there's a limited amount in which the recoil pad can actually compress before it's just straight force to your shoulder. And we saw the same with the Packmeyer, the Limb Saver, every some shotgun pads we tested, stuff like that, looking for the right pad for this application. And the difference is you would increase in force, it would plateau for a moment as that pad begins to compress. You'd reach a point, it would increase in force again and then plateau again, because there's so much more room for this lattice internal structure to compress.
So versus what would that curve look like on like a traditional solid rubber pad?
Basically what we were seeing is so we're looking at a bell curve essentially. It's increasing. There's a slight plateau at around 200 force pounds.
Okay.
And force pound. There's a slight plateau. And essentially what that plateau is showing is the pad is reacting to the recoil force and it's beginning to compress. Well, that plateau ends very quickly in approximately a millisecond from our data findings,
And
and then after that, it
straight
just
up
spikes.
almost. Yeah.
It just spikes. And so we're seeing.
So that's the kick you're feeling.
Right. Yeah. You're getting that push of influx that you're getting, especially from a Magnum cartridge, is just a traditional rubber pad cannot absorb the recoil like one of these pads does.
So I found it interesting when we were talking a while ago about this, is some of the things that we thought were a little counter. The data proved that what our initial concept was, like this super soft and squishy recoil pad would greatly reduce recoil. And that's not necessarily true, because you just get through that soft squishy part really fast, and then you feel 100% of the recoil of the gun. And it was better, like when you just first pick up this 3D Hex pad, it doesn't feel like the softest pad in the world. And you start, people do this little thumb test, you push your thumb into it, how soft is it? But what that allows it to do is that the moment of the shot, it collapses relatively slowly, and it breaks out that force over more time, so there's less felt recoil.
Right. So I feel like everyone has had the memory of shooting their grandfather's shotgun that's got that sun-baked recoil pad that is a rock.
Yeah, or just the straight plastic.
Yeah, and
one,
they're ready to
Yeah.
exactly. They're ready to wince at every pull of the trigger. And I know myself, when I'm feeling a gun at the gun store, I'm pressing into the recoil pad to see what it feels like.
Right.
And what can be misleading on these pads is these pads can sometimes feel stiffer than a traditional Pachmeyer. But again, because of that material choice that Peak 44 has made, what it allows it to do is, despite it being a little bit stiffer sometimes on the onset, when you have a rifle go off, even say a 6.5 Creedmoor, you're putting about 400 pounds onto your out of the end of the muzzle in just a split second. And so pushing on your thumbs, you're doing maybe 10 feet-pounds. You're not doing a lot.
Yeah.
So the amount of recoil that is coming out of the end of these guns, like, again, the 7mm Weatherby, we're seeing on generally about 1,800 foot-pounds out of the end of that muzzle, felt at the strain gauge. And so, yes, a stiffer pad has actually seemed to come out and reduce recoil, or at least mitigate that recoil over time better than a softer pad. We find that the softer pads, essentially, they collapse, they compress too quickly,
and then allowing
for that mitigation to end. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Pretty cool when you can really break it down into the exact data and science. Hopefully we can maybe show one of these graphs. That I don't want to give any of our proprietary info, but I think we've got some plans in the future to use some of the graphs that you've been working on. And long term, I bet some of the listeners to the podcast might really like to see, like, I'm thinking out loud, which is dangerous now, but uncharted territory. But I would love to figure out a way where we could say, okay, here's what a 460 Weatherby feels like compared to a 300 Weatherby, compared to a 30-06, compared to a 223. Obviously, it's kind of apples to oranges there, but like as much as possible, all things the same, like with this recoil pad or without, or just testing out what's it feel like. You try to describe what recoil feels like. Well, it's different to everybody. Everybody's, how you hold your gun matters, right? I mean, if you got a little bit of airspace between your shoulder, you're not have it tight in the pocket, you're going to get hit.
It's interesting you bring up these different cartridge comparisons, because these are the baselines that people generally use.
Right.
They've got their Varmint 2250 and they're looking at getting a 300 Weatherby and they're like, gosh, how does it compare? And I think, you're asking an engineer to collect data, and I'm getting giddy over it. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
I'm getting pretty excited.
I like it.
I've shot the 460 before, and it is wow.
Have you put the 460 in the strain gauge?
I haven't yet. We need to buy some extra strain gauges in case.
You think it might break the strain gauge?
I mean, yeah. We've bent the stem on the strain gauge, testing some of the rubber recoil pads out there. So we've had to actually change some of the apparatuses that we use so not only we're not pressing the strain gauge directly against the pad, we've actually got kind of a simulated shoulder, something that actually simulates how it would be there, where the most contact of your shoulder is actually going to be hitting the pad. That's the part of the pad we want to test.
Right.
You know, we don't want to dilute the data, and especially since we were testing this for an industry partner. You know, we wanted to make sure that we were doing all of our due diligence and getting everything right in this testing before we, you know, jump in with them.
Yeah, we should also just say that like fake shoulder is kind of designed just to be like an average, you know, like nearly 6 foot tall dude without a ton of padding in there.
Yeah, no sweater on, no hunting jacket, just
and then each one is mounted and basically strapped to that shoulder in such a way that it kind of mimics like a ideal shooting form. So if someone has less than ideal shooting form where they don't hold it tight or they hold it, you know, in a weird position where it's just slightly off the shoulder, that's all gonna, you know,
it's gonna change. It's gonna change the
sure.
impulse of that recoil. Exactly.
Well, I think my favorite thing about what you've done is in talking to marketing partners and buyers as we sell these things. I get this look because the conversation goes like this, right? It's like, we've got this new backcountry, it's super light, and then they're like, yeah, great, but how's that feel in a 300 Weatherby? And then I say, not bad, and then they kind of like, oh yeah, he's a used car sales guy, of course it doesn't kick bad because he just wants us to buy it. But then if we're in a place where there's a demo or we can shoot one and somebody shoots it for the first time and they're like, it's really not bad, you weren't lying. I'm like, yeah, I know. That's what we've been trying to say.
It's incredible the differences it makes.
Yeah.
It really is.
And I love that you can quantify the difference now beyond just saying, oh, this one doesn't kick as bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's been a really fun project to work on.
Well, if you haven't yet tried out one of the new backcountries with the 3D Hex Recoil Pad or the Peak 44 stock, make sure that you figure out a way to do that. I can't tell you exactly which local gun shop to go check out, but there are many that have them or can get them on order, although this market's nuts. So if you ever find yourself in or around Sheridan, Wyoming, we have pretty much one of every model downstairs in our showroom. We invite you to come in and check them out. So, Baz, thanks for joining and talking about your testing machine and your results. Pretty cool.
Luke, thanks for having me.
Yep, you bet.